My friend group implicated me in a blackmail ring, so I burned their perfect lives to the ground. I used to think the hardest part of attending one of the most prestigious universities on the East Coast was the imposter syndrome. I was the scholarship kid from Ohio in a sea of Hampton summer homes and legacy admissions, the girl who proofread everyone's essays in the common room just to feel like I belonged. Then, my best friend handed me an iPad in the back of the Founders Library, and my entire life turned into a federal crime scene. "Just look at the spreadsheet, Naomi," Chloe whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the towering stacks of leather-bound books. Her usually perfect blonde blowout was frizzy, a telltale sign she'd been spiraling for hours. "We have a problem with the accounts, and since you're the math whiz," I took the tablet, expecting to see a budget for our sorority's upcoming spring formal or the cost breakdown for the group's Aspen trip. I didn't see flight costs. I saw a ledger. It was a terrifyingly detailed list of names, tenured professors, local politicians, even the dean of students, next to columns of crypto wallet addresses and a section titled Leverage. In the very last column, under the heading Account Custodian, was my name, printed in bold, clinical font. "Chloe, what the hell is this?" I hissed, my voice cracking like dry wood in the silent library. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Why am I listed as the owner of an offshore wallet with 6 figures in it? We had to put a name on it that looked clean," she replied, her voice gaining a terrifying, jagged edge. She wasn't the sorority sister I knew anymore. She was a stranger. "You're the straight A student, Naomi, the girl with the spotless record and the frantic need to please. If the police ever track the payments, you're the one holding the bag, not us. Mark set it up so the routing numbers trace back to your student ID. Us." The word felt like a physical blow to the chest. My entire inner circle, Chloe, Mark, Tyler, the people I've trusted since freshman orientation, hadn't just started a blackmail ring. They had built a trap with my life as the bait. "You're implicating me in a felony," I said, my heart becoming a frantic drum against my ribs. "Do you have any idea what this does to me? I'm applying to law school next semester. I lose my scholarship if I even get a noise complaint." Chloe leaned in, her empty smile widening into something predatory. "No, Naomi, we're keeping you safe. As long as you stay quiet and keep handling the transfers, nothing happens to that law school dream. We pay off your student loans, you keep your mouth shut. But if you walk away, well, the digital evidence already says you're the mastermind. Who are they going to believe? The legacy kids with the high-powered lawyers or the financial aid student who needs the cash?" She patted my hand, picked up her iced latte, and walked away, leaving me alone with a tablet that felt like a ticking bomb. "They think I'm a liability they can control. They think I'm just the help. They're wrong." That night, the ivy-covered brick walls of my dorm room didn't feel like a sanctuary. They felt like a cell. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the floor, the stolen iPad's blue light turning my face a ghostly pale as I became a ghost in the machine. Chloe thought my brain was only good for tutoring her in macroeconomics so she could pass her finals. She seemed to have forgotten that I was on a full academic scholarship for forensic accounting. If I was going to be the account custodian for a felony, I was going to know exactly what I was holding. As I dug through the encrypted layers of the offshore crypto wallets, the high-tension reality of their business became chillingly clear. They weren't just blackmailing a few professors for better grades. This was an industrial-scale operation. Mark, the group's tech genius who spent more time gaming than studying, had written a script that scraped the university's private servers. They had emails between the dean and his mistress, search histories of trust fund kids trying to buy Adderall, and photos that would ruin political careers before they even started. They were harvesting shame and selling it back to the victims. But as I traced the flow of Ethereum through the blockchain, I noticed a discrepancy, a tiny fractional rounding error in the payouts that a lazy trust fund kid like Mark would never notice, but a scholarship student who budgeted every penny would spot instantly. "Wait, Chloe, you absolute snake," I whispered to the empty room, the only sound the hum of my mini fridge. I cross-referenced the transaction hash with the primary ledger. I found it. A secondary shadow wallet buried deep in the code. It wasn't shared with Mark or Tyler. It was strictly Chloe's. She hadn't just implicated me to stay clean. She was skimming off the top of the group's total take. She was stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the very people she called family. She was already betraying the circle long before they decided to frame me. My hands shook, not with fear this time, but with adrenaline. I realized the leverage I now held. This wasn't just a spreadsheet anymore. It was a roadmap to their mutual destruction. If Mark and Tyler knew Chloe was ripping them off, the group would fracture. If the authorities saw this, it proved premeditation and embezzlement. "You want me to handle the transfers?" I muttered, a cold, sharp smile finally touching my lips as the sun began to rise over the campus quad. "Fine, I'll handle them exactly the way you deserve." I wasn't just looking for a way out anymore. I was looking for the match that would light the fire. They built a ring of fire around me, thinking I would burn. They forgot that I was the one holding the fuel. The first crack in the group's armor didn't come from inside. It came from the outside, and it arrived with a knock that sounded like a death warrant. I was heading to my torts lecture, my head still buzzing from the sleepless night and the terrifying knowledge of Chloe's shadow wallet, when a sleek black town car pulled up onto the curb, blocking my path. The tinted window rolled down, and I found myself staring into the cold, recessed eyes of Judge Harrison. I recognized him instantly from the leverage list. He was the biggest fish flesh they had caught. A federal judge with a reputation for handing out maximum sentences and a family name that was plastered on half the buildings on campus. "Get in, Naomi," he commanded. It wasn't a request. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that made my stomach drop into my shoes. I looked around, desperate for a witness, but the campus path near the Arboretum was eerily empty this early in the morning. I slid into the leather seat, the smell of expensive tobacco and pure panic filling the cabin. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He shoved a printed email into my lap, a demand for $50,000 sent from an account with my name on it. "I've spent 30 years on the bench, girl. I know a shakedown when I see one," he growled, turning to face me. "But you're sloppy. You used your university email address to routing test the deposit." My heart stopped. Chloe hadn't just used my name on the ledger. She was actively framing me in real time, leaving a digital breadcrumb trail straight to my dorm room. She wasn't just using me as a shield. She was painting a target on my back to distract the victims while she cashed out. "I didn't send this, Judge. I swear. I'm being framed just as much as you are," I blurted out, my voice trembling. He let out a dry, hacking laugh that sounded like sandpaper on bone. "Do I look like I care about your sorority drama? You have 48 hours to make this disappear, or I'm signing the warrant for your arrest myself. I don't care who else is involved. You're the face of this, Naomi. You're the one the paper trail leads to. Fix it, or your life ends on Friday." He leaned in closer, his eyes boring into mine with the weight of the entire judicial system behind them. "And if this leaks, if my wife finds out about the payments, I have friends in places much darker than a prison cell. Do you understand me?" He shoved me out of the car and sped off, leaving me standing in the rain with a realization that set my blood on fire. My friends weren't just waiting for me to fail, they were actively pulling the trigger. I had 48 hours to take down a criminal enterprise, or I was going to be buried by it. The adrenaline from the judge's threat hadn't even cooled before my phone buzzed with a notification from our Inner Circle encrypted chat. It was a pin drop for The Foundry, a renovated industrial space in the Arts District that Mark's parents owned for tax purposes. No text, just the coordinates. When I arrived, the air inside was thick with the smell of damp concrete and expensive Santal 33 perfume. Chloe, Mark, and Tyler were standing around a sleek glass table, illuminated by the harsh blue glow of server racks. They looked like they were prepping for a Met Gala after-party, not a felony. Mark didn't even look up from his laptop. "You're late, Naomi," Chloe said, her voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. She walked over and handed me a cheap plastic burner phone. "The judge is being stubborn. He needs a nudge. We've found out his daughter, Emily, is applying for the same law program you are. It would be a shame if her extracurriculars, specifically the photos from that frat party last semester, leaked to the admissions board, wouldn't it?" My stomach turned. They weren't just asking me to watch anymore. They wanted me to pull the trigger on a girl I'd known since freshman orientation. Emily was innocent. She was just collateral damage in their game of wealth extraction. "I thought we were just handling corrupt business owners," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the vast space. "Since when do we go after students?" "She's 18, Chloe." Tyler stepped into the light, his jaw tight. He was the group's muscle, though he mostly just intimidated people with his lacrosse stick and his father's connections. "Since the judge started making noise about a warrant, you're the one who let the university email slip, Naomi. This is your mess to clean up. Send the file, or we tell the judge you were the one who suggested targeting his family in the first place." They were closing the circle. They wanted my fingerprints on the weapon so I could never turn on them. I looked at the burner phone. The send button felt like a heavy weight. I knew if I pressed it, the Naomi who wanted to be a lawyer would die right there on that concrete floor. "Do it," Chloe whispered, leaning into my personal space, her voice silky and terrifying. "Or we find out if that spotless record of yours can survive a RICO investigation. Prove you're one of us, Naomi. Prove you want to survive." I stared at the send button on that burner phone, the light from the screen reflecting in Chloe's cold, expectant eyes. My finger hovered over the glass, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead, dissecting the situation like I was back in moot court. They wanted to tie my hands with a felony, thinking that shared guilt creates loyalty. But they had made a fatal mistake. They were playing a game of street-level extortion against a woman trained in the nuances of federal law. "Tick-tock, Naomi," Mark muttered from the corner, the rhythmic tapping of his mechanical keyboard sounding like a countdown. "Admissions decisions go out on Monday. We need to tank her application tonight." I took a breath, looked Chloe dead in the eye, and pressed it. I watched the progress bar slide across the screen. Sent. Chloe smirked, satisfied that she finally owned me. What she didn't see was that I hadn't sent the judge's daughter's extracurriculars to the law school admissions board. Using a vulnerability in the burner's predictive text settings that I'd noticed the second she handed me the phone, I had quietly swapped the recipient email to a dead drop address I controlled. To them, it looked like a successful hit. To me, it was the first piece of evidence in a whistleblower's file that would qualify for a legal loophole under the Organized Crime Control Act. I had just saved the girl and secured my leverage all without blinking. "There, it's done," I said, handing the phone back to Tyler, keeping my hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Are we finished for tonight? I have an exam in the morning." "For tonight?" "Yes," Chloe said, patting my cheek with a patronizing affection that made my skin crawl. "See? It wasn't so hard to be a team player. You're finally learning how the real world works, Naomi. Morality is just a luxury for people who can't afford a fix." As I walked out of that warehouse and into the cool night air, the fear I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I wasn't just a law student anymore. I was a double agent. I knew that under 18 U.S. Code Section 1962, I could claim coerced participation if I provided the killing blow to their operation. I had the ledger, I had the coerced email. I just needed one more thing: the physical hardware key Chloe kept on her keychain. That key controlled the smart contract for the offshore accounts. If I could get my hands on it, I wouldn't just be clear of the crime, I would be the one holding their entire fortune hostage. Getting that hardware key wasn't going to be a game of ninja-like stealth. It was going to be a game of best friends. I knew Chloe's routine better than anyone. I knew she was allergic to cheap vodka. I knew she hated being ignored. And I knew that every Thursday night, she parked her common sense at the bottom of a dirty martini at the Vault, the only club in the city with a strict no townies door policy. Girls' night? My treat, I texted the group chat. I needed them relaxed. I needed them to believe that Naomi, the good girl scholarship student, had finally cracked under the pressure and embraced her dark side. When we met at the bar, the bass was thumping so hard it rattled the fillings in my teeth. Chloe was already glowing, holding court in a VIP booth that cost more than my tuition for the semester. And there it was, the hardware key, a small, unassuming silver USB drive, dangling from a Prada lanyard hooked to her purse strap. It was the crown jewel of her empire, and she treated it like a bag charm. "To Naomi," Chloe toasted, her eyes glassy as she clinked her crystal glass against mine. "The newest member of the board. You handled that judge thing like a pro. I knew you had it in you. I just realized you were right," I lied, leaning in with a conspiratorial whisper, shouting over the DJ. "Why work for the law when the law can work for you? I'm tired of being poor, Chloe." I waited for the inevitable. 45 minutes and 3 rounds of drinks later, Chloe stood up, swaying slightly. "Bathroom run. Hold my purse? If I take it, I'll leave it on the sink." This was it. The moment she disappeared into the crowd, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked across the table. Tyler and Mark were engrossed in a heated argument about a parlay on the Knicks game, their backs turned to me. With a sleight of hand I'd practiced for 4 hours in front of my vanity mirror that afternoon, I unclipped the lanyard from her bag. My hands were slick with sweat as I slid the silver key into the hidden pocket of my blazer and replaced it with an identical dummy drive I'd bought at the campus bookstore tech counter for $12. I clicked the fake back onto the Prada clip just as I saw blonde hair emerging from the crowd. "You okay, Naomi? You look a little pale," Chloe said, sliding back into the booth and squinting at me through the dim, strobe-lit haze. She reached for her bag, her fingers brushing against the fake key. My breath hitched. If she noticed the weight difference, or the lack of a scratch on the side, I was dead. "Just the music," I said, flashing a smile that felt like it was made of glass. "I think I'm just ready to start making some real money." She laughed and took a sip of her drink, oblivious. I felt the cold metal of the real key pressing against my ribs. I didn't just have their secrets anymore. I had the keys to the vault, and they were too drunk on their own power to notice the door was wide open. The silver key in my pocket felt heavier than lead as I stumbled out of the club and into an Uber. I didn't head back to the dorms. I couldn't risk Chloe waiting there for a post-game debrief. Instead, I directed the driver to the Greeks, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city that served burnt coffee and anonymity in equal measure. I wasn't going there for pancakes. I was going there to meet the one man who could actually help me burn this whole thing down. Judge Harrison was already there, tucked into a back corner booth with a cup of black coffee that looked as dark as his mood. He wasn't wearing his judicial robes or the bespoke suit from the town car. He was in a hoodie and a baseball cap, looking less like a federal judge and more like a fugitive. "You're 5 minutes late, Naomi," he said, his eyes scanning the room with practiced paranoia as I slid into the vinyl booth. "I hope for your sake you have more than just excuses. My wife is asking questions about the bank withdrawals." I didn't say a word. I pulled out my laptop, plugged in Chloe's stolen hardware key, and turned the screen toward him. His eyes widened. He wasn't looking at a screenshot or a PDF. He was looking at the live ledger. Thousands of transactions, names of city officials, professors, and business owners, all scrolling in real time. And right there, highlighted in neon green, were the specific routing numbers that proved his blackmail payments weren't going to the group's shared fund. They were being diverted into Chloe's personal shadow wallet. "I'm playing the part of the double agent," I whispered, leaning in so the waitress refilling the sugar dispensers wouldn't hear. "They think I'm one of them now. They think I sent the file on your daughter to the admissions board, but I intercepted it. It's right here, safe on my private server." The judge's hand shook as he reached out to touch the screen, tracing the line of code that represented his life savings. "Why show me this? You're listed as the custodian. You could go down for all of this. You're handing me the gun, Naomi." "Because I'm a law student, Judge. I know that under 18 U.S. Code Section 1962, I can claim immunity if I provide the state with the heads of the organization," I said, my voice finally finding the steel I had been forging for days. "I don't just want out. I want them to pay for trying to ruin me. I'll give you the keys to their kingdom, the passwords, the locations, the physical evidence, but I need you to be my shield when the dust starts to settle." He looked at me for a long time, the silence stretching between us like a tight wire. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He realized I wasn't the villain. I was the weapon he needed to fire back. Finally, he nodded. "You get me the rest of those names, Naomi, and I'll make sure the district attorney knows who the real whistleblower is. But be careful. People like Chloe don't just go to jail. They take everyone down with them. If she finds out out you flipped, she won't just ruin your reputation. She'll make sure you never make it to graduation. As I walked out of the diner, the dawn breaking over the city, I knew the bridge was officially burned. I wasn't just Naomi the student anymore, I was the architect of their collapse. And tomorrow morning, I was going to start demolishing the foundation. The next morning, the inner circle group chat was uncharacteristically silent, and that silence was louder than any screaming match. When I walked into our shared off-campus study suite, a luxury apartment paid for by Tyler's father for academic focus, the air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. It smelled of stale champagne and high-voltage anxiety. Mark was hunched over his Alienware terminal, his fingers flying across the keys with a frantic, jerky rhythm. His eyes were bloodshot, glued to a screen cascading with red command lines. Chloe was pacing the floor in her silk robe, her phone pressed so hard against her ear that her knuckles were white. Someone accessed the admin logs at 3 a.m., Mark spat out, not even looking up as I dropped my bag on the sofa. And it wasn't just a login. They were poking around the smart contract protocols. They bypassed the biometric handshake. Chloe stopped dead. She slowly lowered her phone, her eyes darting to me with a look of predatory suspicion. The air in the room shifted, turning instantly toxic. "Naomi," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "you were pretty hammered last night. You sure you didn't lose that tablet or let your good girl conscience get the better of you? You left the club early." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face a mask of hungover annoyance. "I was asleep by midnight, Chloe. I threw up in the Uber and passed out. Check the GPS on my phone if you're so worried." I walked over to the fridge and grabbed a water, feigning nonchalance. Maybe Mark's unbreakable encryption isn't as solid as he thinks it is. You guys are always bragging about military-grade security, but maybe a freshman CS major just got lucky. I was gaslighting them, throwing the blame back onto Mark's ego to buy myself room to breathe. Mark's head snapped up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "My encryption is fine. This wasn't a brute force attack. Someone had a key. I'm seeing a ghost signature on the ledger." Chloe's eyes widened. She snatched her Prada bag off the marble counter, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the lanyard. My breath hitched in my throat as she pulled the silver USB drive out into the harsh morning light. She stared at it, her eyes narrowing as she felt the weight. I had spent hours finding a dummy drive that felt identical, but in the harsh light of their paranoia, every second felt like a year. If she plugged it in, if she saw it was empty, I was done. "It looks fine," she whispered, rubbing her thumb over the casing. She didn't plug it in. She just gripped it tight, the fear in her eyes hardening into something uglier. "But until we know for sure where that login came from, nobody leaves this floor. We're holding an emergency meeting. If there's a snitch in this room, they aren't walking out with a pulse." The trap was closing, but it wasn't closing on me yet. It was closing on all of us. Paranoia was their new leader, and I was the one who had handed him the crown. The tension in the suite was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest like a lead vest. I knew if I didn't give them a body to tear apart within the next 5 minutes, they'd eventually circle back to the girl who had the tablet last. Mark was still spiraling, his screen flashing red alerts as he tried to trace the ghost in the system. I saw my opening, a way to redirect the hunter's instinct toward the weakest member of the herd. "Mark," I said, my voice dripping with fake concern, barely audible over the hum of the servers. "Check the login history from Tyler's laptop. He was awfully quiet at the bar last night, wasn't he? And he's been the one complaining the most about his cut of the judge's payment not covering his bookie debts." Tyler's head snapped up from the sofa, his eyes widening in shock. "What? Naomi, you liar! I haven't even opened my laptop since Tuesday. I was rushing a pledge class all night. Then why did I see a Bluetooth sync request from your device while I was looking for the Wi-Fi at the club?" I pushed, stepping closer to Chloe, effectively positioning myself as her shield. "He's been playing the loyal soldier, Chloe, but think about it. He's the only one with enough technical knowledge to actually challenge Mark, and he's the only one desperate for cash. It was a total fabrication, but in a room fueled by ego, cocaine, and fear. It was the perfect spark." Chloe turned on Tyler like a viper, her face contorting into a mask of cold fury. "Is that true, Tyler?" she hissed. "You think you can skim from me? You think you can frame the scholarship girl because she's an easy target? I didn't. She's lying," Tyler screamed, standing up, but Mark was already hacking into Tyler's local drive, prompted by my suggestion. I held my breath. Earlier that morning, during my sleepless audit, I had used the hardware key to plant a single tiny encrypted file on Tyler's shared cloud storage, a sacrifice I'd prepared specifically for this moment. "Found it?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "A hidden partition on his drive. It looks like a mirror of the ledger, and a draft email to the dean of students." The room erupted. Tyler tried to bolt for the door, but Mark, fueled by adrenaline and betrayal, tackled him into the glass coffee table. It shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards flying across the Persian rug. "Get off me!" Tyler yelled, blood trickling from his nose. "You traitor!" Chloe screamed, kicking him in the ribs with her Gucci loafer. I stood back in the shadows of the kitchenette, watching as the people I once called friends turned into animals. I had bought myself time, but at a terrible price. Tyler was innocent of this specific crime. He hadn't snitched. But in this game, innocence was just another resource to be spent. I watched them beat him, my heart cold, knowing that while they were busy devouring one of their own, they weren't watching the bathroom door. While the luxury apartment was still echoing with the sickening thuds of Tyler's punishment and Mark's hysterical accusation conditions, I slipped into the guest bathroom and locked the door. The marble tiles were cool against my back as I slid down to the floor, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was the moment of no return. The Rubicon wasn't a river, it was a send button on a touchscreen. I pulled out my phone. Using the access codes I'd harvested from the hardware key the night before, I opened a secure terminal app connected to my private server. On the screen was a single, pulsating command prompt I had named the Ides of March. Time to see if the judge was right about the district attorney, I whispered, my thumb hovering over the execution command. I wasn't just sending a file. I was initiating a ledger leak protocol. I had designed it to look like an automated dead man's switch triggered by the system breach Mark was currently chasing. A failsafe that went rogue. With one tap, the encrypted evidence, complete with the routing numbers to Chloe's secret shadow wallet, the audio recordings of their coercion in the warehouse, and the full list of victims, was blasted to the district attorney's dedicated tip line, the FBI Cybercrimes Division, and the Daily Crimson student newspaper. I watched the upload bar hit 100%, packet sent. I could hear Chloe screaming at Tyler in the other room, demanding to know who else he had talked to, oblivious to the fact that the sky was already falling. The clock was now ticking in seconds, not hours. The first anonymous notification would hit the victims' phones in less than a minute. By morning, the leverage they held would be worthless, transformed into a roadmap for a federal RICO investigation. I stood up, flushed the toilet to sell the lie, and splashed cold water on my face. I needed to look terrified. I needed to look like a victim caught in the crossfire. I unlocked the door and stepped back out into the chaos, my face a mask of practiced terror. "We have to get out of here," I screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Mark's massive monitor, which I had just remotely triggered to display a catastrophic system failure. "Mark, look at the screen. What is that?" Mark spun around and the blood drained from his face. His screens were no longer showing code. They were scrolling with flashing red, unauthorized export warnings. "Oh my God," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "The ledger, it's leaking. It's all going out. Someone triggered the failsafe." The look of pure, unadulterated horror on Chloe's face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She dropped Tyler's collar, her eyes wide, realizing that the fire she had started was finally burning her alive. "Stop it," she shrieked, scrambling over the broken glass toward the desk. "Pull the plug, Mark. Kill the server." "I can't," Mark yelled, typing furiously at a keyboard that was no longer responding. "It's locked. It's broadcasting to an external IP. It's gone, Chloe. It's all gone." For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one standing in the center of the flames. I was just the girl watching them burn. The panic in the room was a living thing, cold and suffocating. Chloe didn't even look at Tyler anymore. He was just a sobbing heap on the floor. Her eyes were locked on Mark's screen as it hemorrhaged their secrets to the world. "Shut it down, Mark. Kill the server," she screamed, her voice hitting a frequency of pure desperation that shattered the last remnant of her composure. Mark's fingers were a blur, but he was fighting a ghost. "I can't. It's locked. Someone's remote executing from an admin level. It's bypassing the firewall." I moved toward the door, trying to look like I was just looking for an escape route, but Chloe's hand snapped out like a trap, grabbing my arm with bruising force. She didn't look terrified anymore. She looked lethal. She dragged me back into the center of the room, her face inches from mine. "You've been awfully quiet during all this technical chaos, Naomi," she hissed, her eyes searching mine for even a flicker of the truth. "The good girl, who just happens to be a top-tier scholarship student with a specialty in digital evidence. This wasn't Tyler. Tyler isn't smart enough to bypass Mark's protocols. Tyler can barely reset his own Wi-Fi password." She shoved me against the wall, the back of my head hitting the drywall with a sickening thud. "Where is the key, Naomi? The real one." I felt the weight of the lanyard earlier. It felt light. It felt like plastic. The room went dead silent. Tyler was bleeding on the floor, Mark was frozen at his desk, and the monster I had been hiding from was finally standing right in front of me. I didn't tremble. I didn't look away. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy silver hardware key, and held it up between us like a trophy. "You're right, Chloe. It was plastic," I said, my voice as cold as the offshore accounts I had just emptied. "And by the time you realize what I've actually done with this one, the FBI won't even need to knock on that door. They'll already have the keys to your cell." The look of realization that crossed her face was better than any law school acceptance letter. I wasn't her custodian anymore. I was her executioner. Chloe lunged at me, her manicured claws aiming for my face, but I sidestepped, moving into the light of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Don't bother, Chloe. It's already over," I said, pointing toward the small blinking LED hidden inside a decorative History of Rome book on the shelf behind her. "Every word you've said for the last 10 minutes, every threat, every confession about the skimming, every order to destroy the evidence has been streamed directly to a secure cloud folder." Mark let out a strangled sound, his hands falling away from the keyboard. The tech genius realized too late that while he was busy looking for a digital ghost in the server, I had gone old school with a high-definition pinhole camera. "You think a recording makes you a hero?" Chloe spat, shaking with rage. "You're on that ledger, Naomi. You're the custodian. You're going to prison right next to us. That's the difference between us, Chloe. I actually read the fine print," I replied, leaning against the wall. "I baited you into admitting you coerced me. I have audio of you threatening my career and my life. Under the duress defense, your little ledger becomes your confession, not mine." The sound of distant sirens sirens began to wail from the streets below, a rising, mournful chorus that signaled the end of their reign. The air in the suite suddenly grew thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burnt plastic as Mark frantically yanked hard drives out of the server rack and began smashing them against the edge of his mahogany desk. "It's too late for that, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of destruction. "Cloud forensics can recover data from a shattered platter. You're just adding destruction of evidence to your rap sheet." Chloe looked from the window to me, her eyes wild. She snapped into a different kind of survival mode, the kind taught in boardrooms and crisis management seminars. "We're leaving, now," she commanded, grabbing her keys and shoving Mark toward the door. "We have the secondary servers at the estate. If we can get there, we can scrub the remote backups physically before the feds get a warrant for the cloud host." They didn't realize that I had anticipated this exact move. I knew they wouldn't surrender. Their entitlement wouldn't allow it. They would run to the one place they felt untouchable, Mark's family estate in the Hamptons, a fortress of old money and high gates. "Grab her!" Chloe barked, pointing at me. Mark and Tyler, fueled by panic and Chloe's command, grabbed my arms. "You're coming with us," Tyler spat, wiping blood from his nose. "If we go down, you're going to be right there in the room with us to explain to the police how you orchestrated the hack." I struggled just enough to make it look convincing, digging my heels into the plush carpet, but internally, I was counting on this. As they dragged me toward the service elevator, believing I was their insurance policy, a hostage to be traded, I felt the familiar rhythmic vibration of my phone in my blazer pocket. My plan wasn't just about the leak, it was about the location. Earlier that evening, I had installed a background script on the hardware key, the real one, that turned any device it touched into a high-frequency GPS beacon. As we piled into Chloe's black Range Rover and sped away from the campus, running a red light and narrowly missing a delivery truck, I wasn't just a passenger in their getaway vehicle. I was a homing signal. "Drive faster!" Chloe screamed at Mark, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror. She was so focused on the police cruisers she thought were behind us that she didn't notice the silent notification on my own screen, hidden in my lap. The beacon was live. Every turn we took, every highway exit we passed on the way to their private estate was being broadcast to Judge Harrison and the DA's task force in real time. They thought they were retreating to a fortress where they could erase their sins and lawyer up. In reality, they were leading the entire cavalry straight to the only place where the physical evidence of their skimming, the cash reserves and the hard copies, was hidden. I sat in the back seat, staring out at the blurred highway lights, knowing that the panic room they were heading toward was actually going to be their final cage. The matte black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the estate, a sprawling, brutalist fortress of glass and steel tucked behind a wall of ancient oaks in the wealthiest zip code in the state. This was where Mark spent his summers, and apparently where he planned to commit his final felonies. Chloe and Mark practically dragged me out of the car and toward the heavy oak doors, their breathing ragged in the cold night air. Inside, the house smelled of old money and lemon polish. They didn't stop in the foyer. They shoved me down a hallway lined with million-dollar art toward the panic room, a high-tech study filled with server racks, backup generators, and enough luxury to make you forget it was built on the ruins of other people's lives. "Mark, get the scrubbers running," Chloe yelled, her composure finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She shoved me into a leather armchair. "Naomi, sit there and don't move. If you so much as touch a phone, I swear to God I will." She was cut off by a sound that didn't belong in this quiet, gated community. The low, guttural roar of a motorcycle engine cutting out right in front of the house. Then came the heavy, rhythmic thud of someone kicking the front door, hard. I looked at the bank of security monitors on the wall. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the police, it was the judge, and he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two other men I recognized from the leverage list, a construction magnate and a local restaurant owner who had lost everything to Chloe's greed. They didn't have warrants, they had crowbars, tire irons, and a look of cold, righteous fury that no law school textbook could prepare you for. "They're here," I whispered, a chill of genuine fear running down my spine. This was the one variable I couldn't fully control, the victim's rage. The leak. They didn't wait for the police, Chloe. They tracked the location from the metadata I sent them. They came for their money. A window in the front hall shattered. The house alarm began to wail, a high-pitched scream that mirrored the panic rising in Chloe's eyes. She realized in that moment that she wasn't just facing a legal battle or a plea deal, she was facing the raw, unfiltered consequences of her actions. "Give us the key, Chloe," the judge's voice boomed from the foyer, echoing through the cavernous house like a death sentence. "We know you're in there. We know Naomi's in there. If you don't open this door, we'll burn the whole place down with you in it." Chloe turned to me, her face pale, her hands shaking as she reached for a heavy brass letter opener on the desk. It was a pathetic defense against what was coming through that door. "You did this," she hissed, backing away from the entrance. "You brought them here." "I didn't bring them," I said, stepping back into the shadow of the humming server racks. "The truth did, and the truth is a lot harder to kill than I am." The house was shaking under the weight of the judge's fury, the heavy study doors groaning as they began to give way under the assault. Mark had curled into a fetal position under the desk, the tech genius finally realizing that Python scripts couldn't protect him from a crowbar. "This is it, Chloe," I said, my voice barely a whisper over the sound of breaking glass. "The last act." While she was distracted by the pounding at the door, I reached behind the main server rack. I didn't need the hardware key anymore. I had already used it to bypass the final security layer hours ago. I pulled out out my phone and opened the custom app I'd spent all night coding. On the screen was a single button labeled Execute Rebate. "What are you doing?" Chloe shrieked, lunging toward me, her manicured nails inches from my face. But I was faster. I didn't hesitate. I hit the button. In an instant, the smart contract I had rewritten triggered. This wasn't a transfer to a private wallet or a hidden offshore account in the Caymans. It was a final transfer. I had programmed the system to recognize the original source of every single deposit in the leverage ledger using the blockchain transaction hashes. The six-figure balance in the crypto wallet didn't just vanish, it shattered. I watched the numbers on the oversized monitor spiral down to zero as the funds were automatically converted and routed back to the bank accounts of the victims. Judge Harrison's stolen retirement, the small business owner's life savings, the tuition funds Chloe had siphoned for her designer wardrobe. It was all flowing back to where it belonged. "It's gone," Mark whimpered, staring at the screen like it was his own tombstone. "Everything. The accounts are empty. There's nothing left to scrub. It's all refunded." Chloe dropped the brass letter opener. The sound of it hitting the hardwood floor was the sound of her power evaporating. She looked at me, her eyes hollow, finally understanding the scope of her defeat. "You didn't just steal it," she whispered. "You gave it back." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors finally burst open with a deafening crash of splintering wood. But it wasn't just the judge who stepped into the foyer with a tire iron. The room was suddenly flooded with a blinding white light of tactical rail-mounted flashlights. The air shattered with the sound of voices that brooked no argument. "FBI! Federal agents, hands in the air! Nobody move!" The cavalry hadn't just arrived. They had arrived at the exact second the money disappeared. I put my hands up, interlacing my fingers behind my head, feeling the cold weight of the night finally lift off my shoulders. I had emptied their pockets, exposed their crimes, and saved the victims, all before the first pair of handcuffs clicked shut. The panic room was suddenly swallowed by a sea of strobe-like blue and red light reflecting off the glass walls. The FBI's tactical team moved with a clinical, terrifying efficiency, their boots thundering against the polished hardwood. "Hands! Show me your hands!" I dropped to my knees immediately. Beside me, Chloe was frozen, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Tyler was still slumped against a wall, and Mark was being dragged from under the desk, his face tear-streaked and pathetic. "Secure the perimeter! Bag the hardware!" the lead agent barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. An officer shoved Chloe into the floor, the zip ties ratcheting shut with a sound that signaled the end of her life as she knew it. As they pulled her up, she locked eyes with me. The mask of the perfect sorority sister was gone. She looked like a cornered animal. "You're going with us, Naomi!" she screamed, spit flying from her mouth as she was hauled toward the door. "I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them you wrote the scripts. You're the custodian. You're the one who emptied the accounts." The lead agent, a woman with eyes like flint in a windbreaker emblazoned with FBI, walked over to me. She didn't shove me. She didn't yell. She looked at the laptop I had left open, the one showing the final transfer logs and the 18 U.S. Code whistleblower citations I had highlighted in bright yellow on the desktop. "Naomi Vance?" she asked, her voice calm amidst the chaos. "Yes," I breathed, my heart finally slowing down. "I'm the one who called you. Everything you need, the recordings, the ledger, the coercion evidence, it's all on that server. I've been acting under duress as a confidential informant for Judge Harrison." 6 months later, the marble hallways of the federal courthouse felt different. The last time I was near a building like this, I was a terrified student shivering in the back of a black sedan. Today, I was the woman holding the oxygen tank for a group of people who were finally drowning. I sat in the front row of courtroom 4B. The air was heavy with the scent of floor wax and the silent vibrating tension of a closing chapter. Chloe, Mark, and Tyler sat at the defense table. They weren't wearing designer labels or university hoodies anymore. They were wearing the standard issue Navy suits their public defenders had scrambled to find them. Chloe looked like a ghost. Her roots were showing. Her skin was sallow and she refused to look in my direction. She had tried every play in the book, blaming me, claiming I was the tech lead, even trying to blackmail the judge I had saved. None of it worked. The digital trail I'd left was a mile wide and 100 feet deep. "Please rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Harrison wasn't on the bench. That would have been a conflict of interest, but I saw him sitting in the very back of the gallery, his face grim but satisfied. He had kept his word. The district attorney had granted me full transactional immunity in exchange for my testimony. The presiding judge didn't hold back. "This was not a victimless crime of digital mischief," he said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This was a calculated, predatory enterprise that used friendship as a weapon. And while the defense claims Naomi Vance was a willing participant, the evidence shows she was the only one with the moral compass to dismantle this machine from the inside." The sentences came down like hammer blows. Mark, 5 years for computer fraud and racketeering. Tyler, 3 years for his role in the extortion. Chloe, 12 years. The skimming, the coercion, and the leadership role carried the heaviest weight. As the bailiffs moved in to lead them away, Chloe finally snapped. She turned toward me, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you're better than us?" she screamed, the sound echoing through the hushed courtroom as she fought against the handcuffs. "You're just a snitch, Naomi. You destroyed your friends. You have nothing." "No, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I stood up, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. "I just graduated, and this was my first successful case. I watched them lead her her through the side door, the door that leads to the cells. My best friend was gone, replaced by a Federal Bureau of Prisons inmate number. The following Monday, the campus felt different. The gossip had moved on to the next scandal, but the weight of what I'd done still hummed in the back of my mind. I stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the dean's office. "She's ready for you, Naomi," the secretary said with a soft, knowing smile. I walked in. Dean Holloway was a legend in the legal world, a woman who had argued before the Supreme Court and didn't suffer fools. She was holding a thick file, and I knew exactly what was in it: the news clippings, the court transcripts, and the formal letter of immunity. "Sit down, Ms. Vance," she said. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a single cream-colored envelope. She slid it across the desk. "This arrived this morning. It's a personal recommendation from Judge Harrison. He suggested that your internship with the local DA's office be fast-tracked for the summer. He also mentioned that he's never seen a more effective cross-examination than the one you gave during the grand jury hearing." I felt the tension I'd been carrying for months finally snap. I looked at the envelope. It was the very law school dream Chloe had tried to use as a leash to control me. "You did something very few lawyers have the stomach for, Naomi," the dean continued, her voice softening. "You looked at a broken system and a group of people you loved, and you chose the law. That's not just straight-A work. That's the making of a prosecutor." I took the letter and walked out of the building. As I stepped onto the sun-drenched quad, I saw the library where it had all started. It was still crowded with students worried about grades and resumes. I looked down at my phone. No encrypted chats, no shadow wallets, no threats. I had lost my friends, my reputation for a few months, and my sense of safety. But as I headed toward the graduation stage, I realized I'd gained something much better. I wasn't just a girl with a spotless record anymore. I was a woman who knew exactly how to handle the dark and how to light the match that burns it all down.